Free soloing means climbing without a rope, a partner, or any hardware, pythons, nuts, or cans, to attach oneself to the wall. The stakes are ultimate. If you fall, you die. What Alex has done is to free solo routes both longer and of much greater difficulty than anyone before him has thought possible. So far, he's gotten away with it, though some of his closest friends are afraid that he's going to kill himself. Free soloing is far more than a stunt. It amounts to reducing climbing to its most elemental challenge. A man or a woman with only rock shoes on his feet and chalk on his fingertips for better purchase against the cliff. It's climbing at its absolute purest. And that is an excerpt from the book we're going to talk about today, Alone on the Wall, Alex Honnold and the Ultimate Limits of Adventure by Alex Honnold and David Royals.
Welcome to Performers, the podcast that takes you into the minds of the world's most extraordinary athletes, coaches, and performers. We're your hosts. I'm Dr. Greg Young, and you've just heard from Dr. Duncan Simpson, and as sports psychology experts, we'll guide you through the pages of their autobiographies, revealing the mindsets, strategies, and habits that propelled the world's best to the pinnacle of their fields. Duncan, we are 10 episodes down. Little bit of a reminder for everyone here is we would love it if you'd pop over to whatever platform you choose to listen, or indeed if you choose to watch us on, and give us hopefully a 5-star rating. Please don't forget to follow the show to make sure that you don't miss any episodes, and we would love it if you could leave a comment or a review. All this helps us to spread the word and keep us doing what we're doing. To continue to do what we do, we need your support. And also to improve the show, we would love your feedback. No matter how big, no matter how small, we'll take it. And you can send that directly to us at performerspod@gmail.com. That is performerspod@gmail.com. So get those fingers flying and send that feedback in. Back to the show. Duncan, why this book today?
Well, the purpose of the podcast, Graham, is to really tap into the collective knowledge of the world's best performers. So ultimately, we can apply their lessons to our own lives. If you listen to this podcast today, you'd probably walk away thinking I have very little in common with Alex Honnold and what he's doing free soloing. But the reality is there are so many life lessons to take out of this book, irrespective of your chosen performance domain. So why this book, Greg? Well, I've been fascinated with Alex Honnold ever since I saw him back on 60 Minutes episode with Laura Logan back in 2000. I think from a psychological side of things, he's absolutely fascinating. And what he does, free soloing, is almost inhuman. It's so difficult to comprehend when you see him up on the cliff without any ropes. And I've used countless clips of him in my sports psychology classes over the year. The book itself is a really unique autobiography, and he has a co-author, David Roberts, who actually offers considerable commentary throughout the book. And there's also a lot of additional quotes from other people that kind of supplement what Alex is saying. And it's not really a linear, traditional autobiography, as it were. And there's a lot of technical climbing language, which I'll try to stay away from the best I can. But again, we're going to weave together a bit of a story, and there's some amazing life lessons to take out of it. The book itself was released in 2015, but we're covering the updated version, which was released in 2019. So let's jump right in. I grew up in Sacramento, California. Both my parents taught English as a second language at a series of institutions in the United States and abroad. Eventually, they landed permanent jobs at American River College in Sacramento. What I like to tell people that on the day that I was born, August 17th, 1985, I could stand up, holding onto her fingers. Like a lot of her stories about me as a kid, I tend to think that she makes them up, or at least stretches the truth a little. First time we're in a climbing gym, according to Mom, she was talking to the supervisor. She turned around and found me 30 feet up in a minute or two. So it was his dad who really had the early impact on his life, Greg, when it relates to climbing. And he said, that took me to the local climbing gym when I was 10. It was just a random spam and another kind of recreation, but it took from the first day. For years thereafter, he would drive me to the gym and would spend the whole afternoon belaying for me. He wasn't interested in climbing himself. Later, he even drove me to other gyms around California where I'd enter competitions. He was a man of few words. We'd drive for hours with almost no conversation. He wasn't comfortable expressing his emotions, but belaying for me tirelessly and driving me all over the state was his way of showing love. So Greg, we got involvement from a parent again, his dad, and he's really offering what I'd call like tangible support. He's belaying for him. and he's driving him all over the state of California so that Alex can pursue his new passion.
I would say that is literal support. So as you mentioned earlier, there's going to be some technical terms in here, and we won't dive too deeply into those technical terms. But I think one of the technical terms that pops up here that we probably should know, because it will pop up again, is this idea of belaying. And belaying in its simplest form is just the person that's working the rope that's attached to the wall, that's then attached to you. So if you do have a slip or a fall, that you don't go splat. Maybe something Alex has to worry about later on in his free soloing career. But his dad is literally providing support from here. But also I think just investing that time and being around. It's not that real emotional support that we might have seen from some other performers' parents, but it's support nonetheless.
From childhood on, there was an elephant in the room. It was that my parents weren't happily married. The Stacys and my say they waited till after I graduated from high school to get a divorce. I'm sure a shrink would have a field day with the fact that, to this day, I have a hard time remembering details of my childhood. So a little bit about Alex in school, and this is from one of his good friends. He says, Alex wore sweatpants to school every day. There was a gray pair and there was a blue pair. He wore t-shirts that were 2 sizes too big. And they said things on them like, I hiked the Grand Canyon, visit Yellowstone, or how to identify deer tracks. He could talk to you about the War of 1812 for an hour. It wasn't so much that he was shy, as so much that he didn't even bother to try. Like, he would speak to you if you spoke to him. He wore hoodies in class, always with the hood up. And he would just sit there. But he always knew the answer because a teacher called on him. From Alex, he says, it wasn't that I hated school. It's just I was an uncool kid. I had a hard time talking to strangers. So, Greg, it sounds like Alex was a little bit of a different cat when he came to school.
I think the idea of an alternative lifestyle perhaps fits here nicely. We're talking about an alternative sport, as it were, in terms of climbing. And it sounds like he's got maybe an alternative way of doing things, an alternative view on the world. So I think this actually probably fits his personality pretty well for, someone who likes a little bit of solitude, someone who likes to kind of be by themselves. What better ways to do that other than clinging to a rock face in the middle of nowhere?
And he was an excellent student. In high school, Alex consistently scored high marks, finishing with a weighted grade point average of 4.8. Yet, he wasn't all that sure he wanted to go to college. At the last minute, he applied only to 2 branches of the University of California, at Davis and Berkeley. Accepted to both, he chose Berkeley. The same year he spent at one of the elite bastions of higher learning was, Alex feels now, a waste of time. The second semester, I stopped going to classes, I'd buy a loaf of bread and an apple, and I'd go out to Indian Rock, diminutive crowd in the suburban Berkeley Hills, and do laps. I just couldn't hack college. That summer, like most freshmen, he moved home with his mother. So, Brady, to understand someone's passion, watch their behaviors closely. I'll say that again. To understand someone's passion, watch their behaviors closely. He's not going to classes. He's skipping class at Berkeley to go rock climbing.
That's right. At Berkeley, one of the elite educational institutions in the world, and he's choosing to skip those classes. And I think what's interesting here is that sometimes we need to experience the things that we don't want to do in order to find our passion and actually get an understanding of the direction that we do want our lives to take. So, he's obviously identified that the academic route isn't the one for him, but being out there and tackling rock faces and little bouldering activities, that sounds very much up his street.
Alex's parents' divorce became final in May of his freshman year. 2 months later, on July 18th, his father was rushing through Phoenix Airport, trying to make a tight connection when he dropped dead of a heart attack. Charles Honnold was 55 when he died. Alex was 19. The event crystallized Alex's decision to drop out of Berkeley. Whether or not he truly mourned his father's death, the loss had a profound impact on Alex's outlook on life. So although Alex doesn't say much about this incident in the book, obviously losing your parent is going to be traumatic, but it definitely crystallizes that idea he's going to drop out of college.
Although it doesn't sound like him and his father were unbelievably close, this is always going to be a mile marker, a flagstone or flagpost in anyone's life, and maybe provides a little bit of an excuse to chase a passion, to chase the thing that you really enjoy doing and that you really want to do. Not every situation is good, but there is good in every situation. And it sounds like this might be the thing that we're experiencing here in Alex's story.
Yeah, I think tragedies often give us that opportunity to refocus and prioritize what do we want to get out of life. And it definitely sounds like Alex is doing that here. So Alex, on climbing. So there's a little bit of technical language here that I think is really important for the listeners to know. There's free climbing and there's free soloing. Free climbing means that you are attached to a rope, but the rope is below you. So if you fall a certain distance with your core by a rope. Free soloing, however, means that you are climbing without anything, no support at all. So that's the difference between free soloing and free climbing. And Alex says, free climbing as opposed to free soloing means that the leader uses his protection only to safeguard a fall. People ask me all the time how I got into free soloing. And I don't think they quite believe me when I give them the honest answer. The truth is that when I started climbing outdoors, I was too shy to go up to strangers at the crowd and ask them if they'd like to rope up with me. God, that I felt pretty comfortable soloing. I discovered that if I had any particular gift, it was a mental one. The ability to keep it together in what I'd otherwise be a stressful situation. So Greg, pretty unique way to get into sport. His personality, his shyness is this forcing function, pushes him into soloing as opposed to more traditional forms of climbing.
For sure. It sounds like he didn't really have a choice. So, if your hand is forced because you don't want to approach people and ask them for, let's face it, life-saving support, it seems a pretty nice example of him being flexible to his approach. Although you could argue that it comes at the cost of socializing and maybe making some new friends. But given what we know about him from his friends, socializing doesn't really seem to be that big of a deal to him. So his willingness in this moment to go it alone, that could be the choice between going and not going. And we might not be even reading about him in this book if he hadn't made the choice to sort of go it alone.
So in the book, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of technical climbing discussion, but we're going to focus on three of his most famous climbs, starting with Moonlight Buttress, which is in Zion National Park. Moonlight Buttress is a 1,200-foot, nearly vertical sandstone cliff in Utah's Zion National Park. It may be the finest, the purest, and most classic route among Zion's thousands of lines. It's also one of the most continuously difficult crack climbs in the world. All the soloing I had done during the previous several years had taught me the value of preparation, but I never prepared for a free solo as diligently as I did for Moonlight, rehearsing the moves on top rope for 2 days until I had every sequence lodged in my memory was crucial. But so were those days of just sitting and thinking, imagining every placement of each hand and foot all the way up the huge route, visualizing everything that I could. In a real sense, I performed the hard work of that free solo during the days leading up to it. Once I was on the climb, it was just a matter of executing.
So really what he's doing here is he's just running through things in his mind. What could go wrong? What could go right? What's the worst thing that could happen? What's the best thing that could happen? What pace do I want? How do I want this to feel? And the beauty of this is that it takes no physical energy. You don't have to be on a rock face, burning calories, as it were, to actually get the benefits of this. So he's doing it off the rock. And I really like this. I'm going to read the sentence again. I performed the hard work of that free solo during the days leading up to it. Once I was on the climb, it was just a matter of executing. We know that preparation leads to confidence for performers, and feeling like you've done everything that you can, that puts you in a great place to be able to tackle whatever your performance is asking of you. And as the old maxim goes, fail to prepare, prepare to fail.
I think the important point earlier in that paragraph, Greg, he is rehearsing some of the moves on top rope, which means he is actually physically climbing with a rope. So he's combining both the physical practice and he's doing the visualization and imagery, which is absolutely essential. So he's combining both, which is important to know.
Well, that shows how much I listen to you, because I completely missed that.
It goes on to say, for me, free soloing a big wall is all about preparation. In a real sense, I had performed the hard work of Moonlight Buttress during the days leading up to the climb. But as I was on the route, it was just a matter of executing. Through most of the second day, I sat in the line just thinking. It's not like I had work to do. I didn't have anything to do except think about the time, sitting and thinking, hour after hour, visualizing every single move, everything that could possibly happen. That's what it takes to wrap your mind around a challenge such as the one I was about to attempt. That's what I mean by preparation. Now I'd find out if I'd prepared adequately, if I could simply execute what I'd visualized. Every handhold, every foothold on the long way to the top of the wall. So Greg, Fundamentally, I think if you have the technical skills to execute a task, then it simply comes down to preparation and how much have you prepared for this challenge. And it sounds like he's done a ton of preparation here.
You're probably right. And we get back to that idea of visualization here. And I think something important to think about and consider here, dear listener, is that when you're visualizing, to make sure that you're visualizing using a skill set that you currently hold. And what I mean by that is if he's trying to visualize something that he's never done before, that becomes a slightly different process, potentially very, very dangerous considering the nature of this activity. If you're rehearsing a presentation or you're rehearsing your golf swing, there's not really a lot can go wrong. But for a really highly dangerous activity like this, you want to make sure that you're sort of playing or performing within your skill set. If you can't afford to make mistakes, being able to image or visualize using that skill set will help you just create a realistic picture in your mind's eye. And you can repeat that over and over and over again until you feel physically prepared, even though you haven't necessarily physically performed the task.
So Alex does go out and just execute. He climbs Moonlight. And because of this, he starts to get a bit of notoriety, as you imagine. Once I told Chris Weiner about Moonlight Buttress, I should have known the word would get out fast. I didn't anticipate, though, the explosion of postings on the internet about the climb. I went online to check them out. My first reaction was surprise. Oh, wow, I'm now in print. That's cool. Somebody even dug up a photo of me climbing. That's my photo, I bragged to myself. I still could not have imagined ever becoming a sponsored professional climber. If I got a little notoriety, I just hoped that maybe some gear company would give me a free pair of rock shoes. That's just the way it is with me. No matter what else I've turned my attention to over the years, nothing seems as interesting as climbing. I can't do without it, even though by now I've been climbing in one way or another for almost 20 years. So Greg, this idea of being a professional isn't in his stratosphere of thinking, and it's very similar to Chris Wellington, who did get into professional triathlon until the age of 30, and Dan Carter, who became an All Black legend. Growing up and going through high school, he didn't think that rugby was a possibility in terms of a profession.
The old maxim goes, find something that you love to do and you'll never work a day in your life. And I totally agree with you. I think Chrissy Welton and Dan Carter are two really nice examples here that were just so immersed and so engrossed in doing their sport and their activity and having passion and fun and just the real drive and desire to be the best versions of themselves within that sport. As they got better and better and they moved through the ranks, that's when notoriety started to happen and people started noticing them a little bit more.
That summer, as I got in shape, making loops and traverses in the High Sierra, Half Dome became my muse, a random source of motivation that drifted through my thoughts while I strolled along one ridge after another. The notion of trying to free solo the route was intimidating, yet irresistible at the same time. In terms of sheer grandness, it would be a big step up for me, an even greater challenge than Moonlight Buttress. It sounds like he's really intrinsically motivated to take on this challenge, and simultaneously, it's quite intimidating.
Alex is going to go bigger and bigger, higher and higher, more dangerous, more technical routes, because that's simply the nature of the progression. And it doesn't seem like he'd do Moonlight Buttress and then move down to something smaller, but it really doesn't sound like he's doing this, as you mentioned, for his own ego. It sounds very much like this is just his intrinsic motivation, his drive, his challenge for him to overcome, to see if he can do it, to put himself to the test. And I think this is, of course, going to be intimidating because by its nature, it should be intimidating, but he does sound very comfortable and capable in his skill set.
As Steve Roper writes in Count 4, The Definitive History of Climbing in Yosemite, the view output from the base is overpowering. It doesn't seem possible that humans can climb such an enormous cliff with normal techniques, i.e. ropes, pythons, and bolts. Of course, Alex is going to try and free solo it. That September, my elbow seemed healed, and I was in top shape from all that cruising around in the High Sierra. Dwelling on Half Dome for months had put me in a mental state where I felt I had to do it. Maybe I just spent so much time thinking about it that now I had to clear it from my mind. Greg, given the ramifications of what he's allowed to do, not sure I love the term had to.
Well, I agree with you. With the first time I read it, I thought that had to is kind of negative, right? Like it's sort of something external forcing him. But when I read it again, I thought that if we look at it in a positive light, oh man, he had to. He just couldn't resist. And that was the kind of the way that I read it. So I actually think this is okay. I think it lines up with his motivation and him striving for his goals. And even though it's intimidating, it's actually a challenge that he really, really wants. And I love it. I actually think it fits really nicely for him here.
This time, though, I knew that once I got up to the base of Half Dome, there was no way I was going to bail. I didn't want to make a big fuss about my project, so I only told two people about it, Brad and Chris Widener. Brad said, "What the fuck?" But then, okay, he said, "Text me when you're done." He was being a bro. Chris tried to talk me out of it. "Dude, that's crazy," he said. "You should rehearse the hell out of it on top rope before you try to solo." "Nah," I answered. "I want to keep it sporting." "Are you crazy?" When I look back at those exchanges, it sounds as though I was being flippant or arrogant. That's not what was going on. I just didn't want to make too big a deal about an attempt, especially in case I backed off low on the route. It's bad form to brag about a climb before you do it. And I didn't want any of my good buddies to get too alarmed. Then I might start worrying about them worrying about me. I guess I was just trying to reassure them. "Hey guys, I think I can handle this. I'll be safe." There was something else going on as well. Despite my emphasis on methodical preparation, I'd begun to think that maybe I'd rehearsed the moves on Moonlight Buttress so thoroughly that I actually took some of the challenge out of the climb. Half Dome was so much bigger than Moonlight that it would take forever to get all the moves dialed. I decided to head up the wall with less preparation. That's what I meant by keeping it sporty. Right? There appears to be a lack of preparation here for Half Dome compared to Moonlight Buttress. And Alex suggests that some of it, he wants to keep it challenging because Moonlight Buttress is almost over-rehearsed. And the other bit is because it would take forever to dial in the moves, like he's in a rush. I think given the ramifications of failure, how do you reconcile this approach?
I love it. I'm all for it. I'm here for it, and we'll hold on to that position. But of course, I'm not claiming here. I'm just watching. But of course, I want him to succeed as well. So here's why I like this. There's a couple of things at play here. The preparation part, could he possibly stress out too much about things, make it literally bigger than it is? You know, there's the maxim that the man who worries suffers twice, once before the event and then once in reality. The reason I like the approach, particularly without rehearsing every single thing over and over and over again, is because I think he's trusting himself to be an athlete here and to be a technician and be able to react and respond in the moment rather than going in with such a pre-planned approach to everything. Yeah, of course, his route is planned, but how he's going to execute and move around that, I like that he's going to be flexible towards it. And if it doesn't go or doesn't feel exactly how he thought it was going to feel and you're so rigid, and you don't have any flexibility in your skills or in your movement, are you going to be able to deal with the real world demands there? Are you essentially preparing yourself for something that doesn't actually exist when you're going to have to be creative, when you're going to have to respond and react in the moment? So I really like this because it gives him some freedom up there. Of course, we know that he needs to prepare so he literally doesn't die. But the way that he's prepared himself to just trust his ability, trust his technical capacity, and go out there and, in his words, execute, I really, really like this.
I think we'll agree to disagree on that one. I'd like to over-prepare for this one. So, resting in the base, I felt completely detached from the rest of the valley glowing in the morning sun below me. As I hoped, I had the whole wall entirely to myself. For the next few hours, I would be alone in a unique way, locked in a high-stakes game of solitude. Greg, sounds like he's in the zone. Locked in, it's solitude, but it's high stakes.
I'd be a little bit worried here, looking at the wall. Why do I have this wall all to myself? If I'm the only one out here, why am I the only one out here? But it sounds very much like it's a solitary approach, and he's a solitary guy, and we know that from how he got into climbing and into free climbing and free soloing. He doesn't want to make a big deal about it and doesn't really need for anyone to know that he's doing it. He's doing it very much for himself. So I guess why not enjoy the solitude? Go out there and do what you do.
So this next bit really emphasizes that piece about being locked in. Before such a climb, I have to get really psyched up. But once I'm off the ground, I'm totally fixated. I'm going to do this. It's the most important thing in life right now. That's not the kind of mental state I can share with random strangers. It's not that much trouble to climb through a rope party when you're soloing. I've done it before and do it again. But encountering others on the wall, especially if they express the incredulity that you're climbing without a rope, that can make you self-conscious. And that can interfere with the absolute concentration you need to pull off a big free solo. We're talking about other climbers here, potentially being distractions. And although he has absolute focus, there's this ego part going on that he's self-conscious about how others may be viewing him in the middle of a climb, and he really wants to avoid that situation.
I think so. There's a couple of things that jump out of this paragraph for me. I really like this idea that he has to get himself psyched up before he gets onto the climb. The greatest journey starts with a single step, but that single step is a very, very important one. You need that physical preparation. So in terms of psyching yourself up and getting your body ready to perform, there is, even though you've got incredibly fine technical elements to it, this is what we would consider gross motor movements. So making sure that your body's in the right physiological state to take on that physical challenge in front of you can't be underestimated. The second thing, going to that idea of obviously climbing through a group that would be doing their own thing out there. I think obviously that would be a roped group, which means like they're doing everything kind of by the book, and safety would be first and paramount. And not saying Alex isn't doing that, but he doesn't have a rope. It's an interesting idea of him being self-conscious when he goes through those groups. That ego can very easily get in the way of what he's trying to do. And I think that the reason that this might happen in the moment, or potentially could happen in the moment, is that his focus in the moment would be shifted away from the process of his climb. The things that he's doing, the route, the execution, the technical elements that he needs to be doing there and then. And rather than that, it would be going to actually him as a person and his humanity and his fallibility in that moment. And I think that is a definite indication of task versus ego focused. So task being the things that I need to do, ego being about me and the immediate impact that it can have on your thoughts, your feelings, and ultimately your behaviors, your performance in essence. So for anyone, we want your performance to be in the moment, and particularly when you're in a real high stakes environment like Alex is here. We want you to be thinking, we want you to be feeling, and we want you to be doing all of the right things. And any distraction from that could be pretty perilous. I really like the idea that he has to get himself psyched up before he gets on the climb. And I really love that he's got a process to be able to do that. So it doesn't shock me when I see that. And I really appreciate him taking the care for that. The second thing is obviously climbing through a group, as you mentioned. It's interesting, the idea of him being self-conscious when he goes through those groups. Ego can very quickly get in the way of what we're trying to do in any given moment. The reason that it happens in this moment, or potentially could happen in this moment, is that his focus will be shifted away from the process of his climb, things that he's doing, his route, his execution, his technical elements, to actually him as a person and his humanity and his fallibility in this moment. And I think that would be a definite indication of task versus ego focus. Task being the things that I need to do, ego being about me and the immediate impact that can have on your thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors, and ultimately your performance. I think any distraction away from the task itself could be pretty perilous here, Duncan.
Yeah, there's some absolute gold in there for the listeners. Some great stuff around task and ego. He goes on to say, the beautiful day was holding steady. I had no time to look around and admire the scenery. The scenery is what you get to enjoy when you're belaying your partner on a conventional road climb. When I'm free soloing, even on easier pitches, I'm totally focused on what's in front of me. The universe shrinks down to me and the rock. You don't take a single hold for granted. The sheer magnitude of the wall came home to me as I climbed. Greg, I'd love your reflection on that sentence. When I'm free soloing, even the easiest pitches, I'm totally focused on what's in front of me. The universe shrinks down to me and the rock, and you don't take a single hold for granted.
That is a phenomenal sentence, and I totally appreciate the sentiment that he's got there. And I'm going to use a word that most listeners, perhaps all listeners, will have actually used before, and maybe not necessarily in this context. And that word is mindfulness. Now, some people might consider mindfulness to be a meditative practice, which it certainly can be used for that. Some might consider it to be a sort of maybe a bit spiritual and a bit hoo-ha, but it's definitely a tool that we in sports psychology world, we use and we embrace it. And I think that's what's going on with him here. So if we think about a definition of mindfulness, what's the best way to conceptualize it? There's a few out there, but I really like this definition. It's the idea of focusing on purpose, with purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. So what does that mean? It means we're paying attention to something specific, and we're trying to deliberately pay attention to that thing. So for him, it's him and the rock, and that's what's in front of him. The present moment focus obviously speaks for itself. But it's not lingering on things that have happened in the past, and it's not projecting your mind forward to the future. It's dealing with literally the task at hand in this present moment, because that's the only place that it can actually be appearing, and the only thing we've actually really got control over. And the last bit, non-judgmentally. And that's not necessarily seeing anything as good or bad, just simply seeing things as they are. They're just experiences, they're just moments in consciousness, and they're really, really useful tools. And when you combine all of those things together, you can really immerse yourself in an experience. So mindfulness isn't necessarily something you strive for. Yes, you could say it's an outcome, a product, but when you break it down into these really tangible elements, again, focusing on purpose with purpose, staying in the present moment, and looking at things as they are in a non-judgmental fashion, that's a really, really useful tool for any high-level performance.
Sounds like a lot of hoo-ha to me. So you said he's really in the moment. Well, I broke off the normal route at a random point and started wandering upward, trying to find a 5.10 variation. But as I moved, I started to get confused about the line. The bushes I was climbing through gave me pause. There was no real signs of human presence here. No chalk marks from previous climbers, no fixed pythons, or even scars where they might have been driven and removed. I started to worry that I was completely dark in the bowl. I was literally in the center of Half Dome, 1,000 feet off the ground, possibly off route on dirt. I said to myself, holy shit, this is hardcore. I hope I can find my way back. It wasn't true panic that I felt, just an uncomfortable anxiety. It would have helped a lot if I'd climbed this variation before, but I guess this is what I bargained for when I told Chris I wanted to keep the challenge sporty.
Anxiety might be a natural and naturally occurring part of any performance. You're going to feel a little bit tense, a little bit nervous. If we look at it in the clinical sense, anxiety is that thing that is pretty debilitating, pretty crippling, for want of a better word, in any moment that really stops you from doing what you're trying to do. Now, if we look at anxiety in a more kind of common parlance, we can use two ways to break it down. One is cognitive anxiety. The other is somatic anxiety. So what does that mean? Cognitive anxiety is exactly that. It's the cognitive process. And we know that's basically another word for thoughts. So cognitive anxiety are the negative thoughts, or the thoughts that cause anxiety that you experience maybe naturally as part and parcel of the performance process. Somatic anxiety, those are the more physiological or the physical symptoms, as it were, of anxiety. So you'll all be familiar with these. Everyone that's listening's probably experienced maybe a dry mouth, or they sweat a little bit, or their hands get a little bit clammy, heart rate increases, maybe a little bit of flushing in the face. And that's another great indicator that you're experiencing some anxiety.
So a key word that's synonymous with both of these terms is fear. He says fear is the most primal element in cutting edge climbing, or indeed in adventure of any kind. Even non-climbers can recognize that fact when they watch footage of me free soloing. That's why the first question out of their mouth is usually, aren't you afraid? ... They don't even have to finish the sentence that you're going to die. I've done a lot of thinking about fear. For me, the crucial question is not how to climb without fear. That's impossible. How to deal with it when it creeps into your nerve endings. So Greg, you're absolutely right. We're talking coping skills here. You can't expect not to have some form of emotional response to such a situation, but it's about how you cope with it in the moment that's all important.
I think you're correct. And he's talking here perhaps a little bit about bravery as well, which I believe we've talked about in previous episodes, where you do something in the presence of fear. And that is a skill that actually needs to be developed as well. It sounds very much unavoidable. And I know for a fact I'd be scared in this situation, and you get that physiological response that I talked about, that somatic response. But knowing how to deal with it and recognizing what works for him in this moment and practicing dealing with it in slightly smaller situations, that's really, really key here. So even though he's got fear being on top of where he is on Half Dome, perhaps that's the fact that he scaled some smaller cliffs that were still technical, and it's a little bit of almost exposure therapy, as it were. He's getting a little bit of stress inoculation where he's getting that drip by drip by drip and starting to build that tolerance, knowing that he's going to be in a situation where if he does experience fear, he's dealt with it previously and he's overcome it before.
So back to Half Dome. He says, my anxiety wasn't ratcheted up to the level of genuine fear, but it got my attention. So I focused hard, took a deep breath, and sorted out my options. I told myself it wasn't a do or die situation. Climbing down is almost always harder than climbing up, but I still felt that I could down climb the whole route so far, all 1,000 feet of it, if I had to. For that matter, if I got into a truly nasty predicament, I could always sit and wait, even for a day or two, until some other climbers came along, asked to tie in with them, and finish the climb as their probably unwelcome guest. Hitchhiking, they call it. Greg, performance is really about a set of problems waiting to be solved. And I'll say that again. Performance is a set of problems waiting to be solved. The mental skills he mentions here, he refocuses, he takes a deep breath, and you can tell he's problem solving because he's using his prefrontal cortex to analyze his options. He's going through kind of step by step. What can I do here? I can down climb. I can sit, I can wait, I can rope in with others if needed. So we know that his amygdala hasn't completely hijacked him. So great performers are also great problem solvers.
I agree, Duncan. And it seems like he's being able to rationalize and still make clear decisions without having what some people would refer to as his reptilian brain, his amygdala, his fear center really take charge here. But I do actually like this idea of performance being a set of problems that need to be solved. It's somewhat clinical and a bit of a cold way to look at it, but I actually think it's really accurate. Every sport and every performance is really just a set of problems, which the performer has to find the best solution for.
So Alex problem solves, he overcomes his mistake, and he makes it all the way to the top. He says, but no one said a word, no yells, no pictures, nothing. Maybe they thought I was a lost hiker. Maybe they couldn't conceive of where I'd come from, or maybe they just didn't give a shit. When I mantled onto the actual top, I was met with a flood of humanity. 100 odd people spread across the summit plateau. Tourists ate lunch next to me. They made out, took scenic photos. People everywhere. It was so weird. Like parachuting out of Vietnam into a shopping mall. I was shirtless, hot, panting, psyched out of my mind, flooded with conflicting emotions. I was embarrassed that I'd gotten so scared on the slab, and I was thrilled beyond words to have finally done something that I'd been thinking about for months. Ashamed of myself and maybe pushing it a little further than I'd planned, yet still so proud of myself.
Duncan, I know we like analogies here, but I've got no idea if we're ever going to top in any shape, form, or fashion in any episode, any upcoming episode, even if we do 1,000 of them, like parachuting out of Vietnam into a shopping mall.
A really interesting turn of phrase he uses there. And what we're hearing, there's so many conflicting emotional cognitive responses. He's there, he's seeking approval from others. He's thrilled. And he's also ashamed at the same time. He endangered himself because of his lack of preparation. But he's also over the moon. There's just a whole host of just contradictions going on. But overall, I mean, he's just accomplished something pretty amazing.
He certainly has. And it does sound like he's put himself into a little bit of bother without perhaps preparing the way that he should have done. And we've mentioned across numerous episodes that we are social mammals and we do like that approval. We do like status sort of within the pack, as it were. So he wants that recognition from probably other climbers, other people that really know how challenging it is. And when it's not there, it's conflicting. And randomly having people at the top that really aren't in on the joke, as it were, he's got this insider knowledge, but there's no common knowledge across the group here.
Greg, that's a perfect segue into this next section because he says, on the summit, part of me wished that anyone had noticed that I'd just done something noteworthy. Though maybe it was better that I didn't have to talk to anybody. How could I have expressed what the last few hours had been like? It was enough that I knew. I didn't make a sound. I took off my shoes and started hiking down the cable route. It was only then that someone noticed. Oh my God, this dude blurted out. You're hiking barefoot. You're so tough. So Greg, a little bit of comedy by Alex at the end there.
You've got to be absolutely gutted in that situation. You've just done something that no one's ever done and you go and hike barefoot. Like, it wouldn't be pretty. I could do that. There's no skill involved there. And so that's the thing that someone pulls you up for. You'd be absolutely devastated.
And I think we're hearing that contradiction again. And that's not a criticism. I think all humans have that contradiction within inside of them. And like you mentioned before, I don't think intrinsic and extrinsic motivation and mutate. I think you can hold both things simultaneously. And he says, on the way down from Half Dome, I stopped to look at two amazing birds. I hate to have to hurry. The whole timing thing, I've claimed in print, it's not a strong point for me. Yeah, if that were really true, why did I time my ascent? Why was it important for me, not only on that day, but on other climbs thereafter? To go after speed records? I suppose it all comes back to purism. A speed record and a big wall is the ultimate validation that I've climbed as efficiently as I know how. It's consistent with my philosophy of life, my emphasis on simplicity, on powering away extraneous stuff. I also like speed records because they give a baseline for improvement. It's nice to know that I can improve on a route. It's gratifying to find that I can go faster. So another contradiction from that purist side of climbing, but he's also timing his routes, and those times go out there to the general public, and he's using those times for some of validation, a little bit of ego. But I do believe that it's also part of self-improvement. It says, despite ascending at a slow draw rather than a sprint, Alex completed a 2,000-foot climb, which spans 23 pitches for rope climbers in an unthinkably short time of 2 hours and 50 minutes. 7 years later, no one else has seriously contemplated, let alone attempted, a free solo of the regular northwest face of Half Dome. And again, this book, the book we're reading, is in 2019, and I still can't find any information on anyone else who's even attempted to free solo this route. So I don't know that your time is going to be beaten when no one else even tries.
Yeah, and if anyone's out there listening and they have found the time, feel free to send us that as a part of a review. Say that's something that we got wrong, that we couldn't find it, and that we've been a massive failure. And again, if you've got any compliments, we'd love to have those as well.
Good plug, good thoughts. Well, in the days after Half Dome, he replied, any huge sense of gratification eluded me. I felt like I'd kind of botched the climb. I'd gotten away with something. It wasn't a perfect performance. Basically, when I'm soloing, normally I have a mental armor. You could say I'm in the zone. Something that's protecting my head from thinking too much. For some reason, he laughs at the memory. On Half Dome, I ran out of the armor that I had. I had a mini nervous breakdown. Right? Again, it sounds like he's really not happy with himself for making this almost fatal error.
If you're able to do something when everything's going perfectly, that is certainly one thing. If your mental armor is intact and everything's going great, that's wonderful. But if you're able to still do that same thing in, let's face it, unfavorable circumstances, when things aren't going great, when maybe you've had to battle through it a little bit more, that's perhaps an even greater achievement. I've used the maxim before that it's easy when it's easy and it's difficult when it's difficult. You've got to be able to perform and do whatever the task is actually asking you to do in that moment. And the fact that he's being able to do this when he hasn't been, well, we'll call it 100%, I actually think that that's super impressive. So I think personally he's maybe being a bit tough on himself here.
To jump ahead a little bit, Alex's fame within the climbing community starts to grow, as does the public interest in him. He films a documentary, Alone on the Wall, in 2010, which wins prizes in numerous film festivals, and it really puts Alex on the map. He also does the really famous 16-minute segment for CBF with Laura Logan, which I mentioned earlier, and I'll put a link in the show notes. We hear in the book how fame perhaps it started to impact expectations around what routes he's going to climb. Alex Lothar's profile of me for alpinists in the summer of 2011, he writes about the pressure on me to keep up in the ante. He paraphrases the public's response to my big solos. What's next? Give us more. And he adds, expectations can be dangerous, and they only become more so when what you are famous for is risking your life. If he's not careful, we could admire Alex Honnold to death. That's a fair comment, but it's not like I haven't dealt with this pressure ever since folks started noticing what I was doing. The pressure only nudges me if it's about a project I want to do anyway. So Greg, what we're talking about here is expectations. And expectations are the shoulds, I have to, I need to, I must. And when we frame tasks using that language, it absolutely invites pressure on. A different way to frame a situation or a task is to talk about the want to. What do I want to achieve? And what I use with athletes, I talk about this as the goal setting mindset. What do I want to achieve? Now, sometimes we reach our goals and sometimes we don't. And when we don't reach our goals, what do? We recalibrate and we go again. When we do reach our goals, we should be incredibly happy with ourselves. And again, set that next target. So he's talking about expectations from others, but it sounds like he's still framing it himself in terms of what are the things he wants to do. Great, because Alex is now turned professional. And one of his favorite quotes comes from the mouth of basketball legend Julius Erving. It says, being a pro means doing what you love, even on the days you don't love it. And he goes on, I've also been people, including several writers, who have wondered out loud whether my sponsors in the media are pushing me to keep risking my life. But I think they're wrong. Nobody says to me, hey, Alex, can you go out and solo harder and harder routes? Nobody wants me to solo, except me. And there's an interesting piece in the book whereby a sponsor actually withdraws. So Cliff Bar pulls sponsorship around the free soloing community due to fears of reprisal in case somebody dies and they don't want to be associated with it. And Alex writes an op-ed about it. And he says, this isn't about drawing a line for a sport or limiting athletes from pursuing their passions. We're drawing the line for ourselves. Then he explained, in essence, that's the same way I feel when free soloing. I draw the lines for myself. Sponsors don't have any bearing on my choices or my analysis of risk. Everyone needs to find his or her own limits for risk. And if Cliff Bar want to back away from the cutting edge, that's certainly a fair decision. But we will continue climbing in the ways that we find inspiring, with a rope, a parachute, or nothing at all. Whether or not we're sponsored, the mountains are calling, and we must go.
Can I just say that if Cliff Bar really do want to stay on the cutting edge and are looking to sponsor things, there's a podcast that's available to sponsor that, Cliff Bar. Other snack bars are available, I think I'm obliged to say. But if you want to throw some money, hell, you can even just throw some product our way. We'll give you a shout out on pretty much every episode. And, we might get some graphics made, whatever it is. But a little bit more seriously, it's interesting that when you said he's gone professional, I was thinking, really, what's the difference here? He doesn't have a ton of equipment. I know it probably helps facilitate some of his travel to be able to do maybe bigger and better things. He talks there about whether you're sponsored or not, whenever the mountains are calling, we must go. And I really like that. It's an interesting one that professionalism is occupying so much of his consciousness, where it's probably becoming a distraction away from the thing that he was just going to do anyway, the thing that he doesn't necessarily want to be paid for, but is now kind of became part of the picture, a part of the scene, as it were.
Well, I think that professionalism allows him to do what he loves to do, allows a little bit of money, but it allows him to travel and to go on expeditions. And Alex talks in the book about some of these expeditions. So after these expeditions, he goes and completes the third of his big 3 climbs that we're going to feature, which is El Capitan in Yosemite National Park. And this is a climb that's captured for the movie Free Solo, which if you haven't watched it is a must see, and you can get it on Disney Plus. And it was dark by now. I started up the nose at 9:30 p.m. I got 150 feet up and I realized I'd forgotten my chalk bag. Must have left it among the debris on the floor of my van. Oh shit, I said to myself. I considered scrambling back down to get the bag, but by then the van had already left. So I just climbed without chalk. The lower pictures were wet, so I found it a little bit hard and weird. This is mind-blowing to me. There's just a lack of preparation and carelessness.
Carelessness is the right word here. And you used in a previous episode the definition of focus being the absence of irrelevant thoughts. It sounds like he's so focused on this climb that he's just forgetting the simple things. And I would say that his focus is, even though it's on the climb, it's probably a little bit misdirected, not enough on what he needs to do in order to do it. And I think a chalk bag, certainly in these situations, of course, with all of my years of climbing experience, would be a useful tool to have.
Climbing in the dark is quieter and lonelier than in the daylight. In some ways, there's no exposure. You're inside this little bubble with your headlamp. A 15-foot beam of light is the whole universe. There was no danger I'd get off route, since I knew the sequences so well by now. And yet, you still sense that there's this void below you, somewhere in the darkness. It's like swimming in the ocean and realizing there's a bottomless abyss below you. Greg, that visual of a bottomless abyss, I don't know, it evokes goosebumps for me.
It is a very powerful picture, but I actually want to use one of the other visuals that he mentions here. So the idea of being in a little bubble with your headlamp, and a headlamp or a spot lamp is an analogy I've used with a lot of athletes in terms of focus. And if you think about where he's directing his focus right now, that is literally what's going on in front of him. That is the area in front of him that's lit by his headlamp. That 15-foot beam of light, what Al Pacino would call the 6 inches in front of your face, that's everything. And we talked about mindfulness a little bit earlier and the idea of focusing on purpose with purpose. So just focusing on that 15 foot in front of you, choosing to direct that beam of light to that specific important element, that's really, really helpful, really useful. And I think that's a really powerful analogy for how he controls his focus when he's climbing.
Yeah, I love that. That's an excellent point, Greg. And here there's some commentary from the co-author David Roberts, and he's speaking about that documentary Free Solo. All at once, Alex's body jerks downward several inches. It's obvious that his foot has slipped off its hold. How had he kept his purchase on the wall with only the fingers of his right hand gripping the outer sight sloping ledge? How close had he come to the fatal flaw everyone worries he'll someday take? Audiences invariably gasp or even shriek out loud at this moment. But on film, Alex's face registers nothing. According to Alex, in that moment, I wasn't even close to falling off. I had a really good handhold. The foot that slipped was not a weight-bearing hold. Having little things go wrong, he says, that's just part of the game. Those kind of things cheat you for a second, but then you just keep climbing. Great. We talked about problem solving. We're talking about coping skills. He's able to process it and move on pretty quick.
It sounds very much like that. And he knows where his best performance lies and where his attention needs to be. And this is an error. And we all have errors during performances. And he's able to, as we talked about with mindfulness, stay in the present moment, figure out what is the thing that I need to be focusing on right now, and non-judgmentally see this as something that's going to happen and progress along his merry way.
What seemed to me to be the crux of the route came at the top of the second pitch, maybe 250 feet above ground. The standard sequence involved opposing side pulls with small and slippery footholds, and I'd found a small 2-finger pocket out to the side that felt slightly more secure. It felt a little nervous, or maybe just excited, or maybe just my awareness was heightened. It's hard to untangle these various feelings, but I definitely felt alive. I knew that this was the only moment on the route where I'd have to really try hard. And that's exactly what I did, completing the sequence exactly as I needed. Once I calmed down a little from overgripping, I knew I'd finished the route. Even though there were still 13 pitches to go, there's a sense of purity to that kind of movement that can't be found with a road or gear. Greg, I'm going to read that sentence again because I think that's fascinating. He says, I felt a little nervous, or maybe just excited, or maybe just my awareness was heightened. It's hard to untangle various feelings, but I definitely felt alive. I'd love your thoughts on that.
When I heard you read it, it reminded me of the film 300. You remember the Spartan film? And it's one of the important lines. I can't remember if it's an opening line, but just definitely an important line. And it says, it's not fear that grips him, only restlessness, a heightened sense of things. And I don't know, that sounded really familiar here, like really attuned to what they're doing. But it's really about appraisal here. Am I nervous? Am I excited? Well, you kind of get to choose in that moment. We talked about cognitive and somatic stuff before, and the nervous and excited feeling is probably the somatic, the physiological stuff, how that stuff shows up. Maybe it's the classic butterflies in the stomach sort of excitement, but that's also what we experience when we're nervous as well. So the appraisal, or the way that he makes sense of those butterflies, if he sees that in a positive way, that's excitement. If he sees it in a negative way, that's probably going to be something like nervousness. The classic line from Steve Bull is, the problem isn't having butterflies in the stomach if he can get them to fly in formation. So I think it's actually just him cognitively appraising what's going on with his body.
And he goes on to say, I get asked all the time about risk. The usual questions are, do you feel fear? Are you ever afraid? What's the closest you've ever come to death? I get really tired of answering those questions over and over again. In all honesty, though, I can say that so far in climbing, I've never come all that close to death, except for my absurd slow showing accident in Lake Tahoe in 2004. I have a take on risk in climbing that surprises a lot of people. I don't think it's about the super difficult climbs, even free solos, that will kill you. I think it's the sheer volume of moderate climbing that might cost you your life. The questions about fear also get tiresome, though I suppose they're natural. Mark Sinner recently told me an amusing story. It was after Mark, Jimmy Chin, and I had given a presentation at the Nat Geo Live series. There were 3 separate lines of folks wanting each of us to autograph posters. One of the guys in Mark's line was a neurobiologist. He leaned in close to Mark and said solemnly, that kid's amygdala isn't firing. The amygdala is part of the brain that triggers the fight or flight response to danger. Apparently, there's a rare genetic condition that destroys the amygdala. In my case, though, the neurobiologist had it all wrong. I'm every bit as capable of feeling fear as the next person. Danger scares me. But as I've told countless folk who ask, if I have a certain gift, it's the ability to keep myself together in places that allow no room for error. I somehow know in such a fix, like on Half Dome in 2008, how to breathe deeply, calm myself down, and get on with it. We're really talking about a set of mental tools that he uses to match the situation.
He certainly does. And the really important thing to hear is that, as we've preached from the beginning of this series and every episode that we've done so far, that these are tools that can be learned, and you don't have to find yourself in these situations and hope that you have the tools to be able to deal with them. These are all the things that you can practice ahead of time. Breathing deeply, the ability to calm yourself down, understanding how anxiety shows up for you on the cognitive side. What are the thoughts that I have? Maybe some of the emotional responses that you have, and how you can best combat those. We've used self-talk a lot over the last 10 episodes. That's been a real standout tool, in my opinion. How do you deal with the somatic anxiety? How does my body show up? Does it get tense? Can we find ways to relax ourselves physically? Can we calm things down and start to slow things down when maybe everything gets ramped up and starts speeding up? But at the end of the day, it's about figuring out what works for you and experimenting. But most importantly, practicing the tools so you can count on them in performance, competition, wherever you really need them to count. Hugely impactful paragraph for me here, Duncan.
And Alex goes on and has some nice reflection towards the end of the book. And he says, I probably can't judge objectively whether at 29 I've reached or even past my prime. But right now, I really do feel that I'm coming into my best years. I think my finest climbs are still ahead of me. I haven't yet pushed myself to the limit. But even more important, I still got a burning desire to climb that's as intense as it ever was. There are so many great challenges out there on walls and peaks all over the world. I feel just the way I did when I dropped out of Berkeley at 19, that there's nothing else in life that's half as interesting as climbing. I know there are plenty of folks, both friends and fans, who think I'm simply rolling the dice to free soloing. As well as he knows me and as fruitfully as we've worked together, Peter Mortimer talks about his doubts as to whether he should continue to film my free solos. Last year, he told a writer, there's a loud chorus out there of people who are not comfortable with what Alex is doing. Even some of his partners think there's a good chance he's going to kill himself. The media are fond of talking about the ultimate limits of adventure. I saw them follow other sports like big wave surfing, or huge waterfall drops in kayaks, or crazy mountain biking. Guys and girls are doing unbelievable things in those realms. It's hard to imagine improving on what they're pulling off. But I believe there is no limits to adventure. Each wave of athlete just takes it a step further, then another step further. I'm sure there will come a time in the future when everything I've done will be regarded as mundane. So Greg, I love this last section that he's kind of reflected on there. Humans will continue to push the physical and psychological boundaries as long as we're around. And I think we're just scraping the surface of what's possible.
I wholeheartedly agree. And that sentence that he uses there, I'm sure there will come a time in the future when everything that I've done will be regarded as mundane. But I think what's important to recognize is that he will forever be seen as a trailblazer. If things are going to continue to push on, some people have to push the boundaries as far as they can possibly be pushed before the next wave of people come on and take those boundaries and push them even further. We see this all the time in sport and performance. It's kind of like Moore's law in technology, where everything gets either half the size or twice as fast every so often. And, we've talked about Formula One in a previous episode. If you look at pit stops, they used to take 20 seconds and then they took 15 and then they took 5 and then they took 2. And now we can get them out of there with a new set of tires and everything that they need in a second and a half. And it's crazy to think about that. But that natural progression has to be started and created by someone for someone else to be able to pick it up and be able to run with that baton.
And he continues, climbers pushing the limits of their sports are pretty self-motivated. They're driven by the challenge itself, not by the urge to imitate some badass hero. If what I do inspires others, that's fine, but that's not why I do it. No matter how much pressure sponsors or media might put on me to try something right, and by and large, they don't apply that kind of pressure. The ultimate decision is mine. I've walked away from more climbs than I can count, just because I sense that things are not quite right. It's a deeply subjective decision, a combination of my mood and the vibe of the place and the weather. It's nothing I could precisely quantify, more like a vague feeling that some days are just not the right day. A shrink might accuse me of clinging on to my boyhood, of refusing to grow up, but boyhood in the best sense is all tied up in adventure. Climbing as well as you can for as long as you can is a boyhood dream, even if you're about to turn 30. What matters most to me right now is that climbing is still totally evolving. I'm still learning new tricks of the trade. I'm still exploring my limits. I may talk about what it would mean to free solo Al Cap, but I also have a whole notebook in my head of potential projects on my tick list. I generally don't like to share these publicly, not because I'm being coy or because I'm afraid someone else might poach them, but simply because I don't like to create expectations. I don't want to feel obligated to climb in any way. And I worry that creating expectations ahead of time would add external pressure. What keeps me motivated is an insatiable hunger and curiosity. The best way I can sum it up is to paraphrase the ending of my op-ed piece in the New York Times. The mountains are calling and I must go. And Greg, that is where we'll leave it today. So many lessons that we can take from Alex's life. What are your top 10 lessons from Alone on the Wall by Alex Honnold and David Roberts?
You are quite correct. Success does leave clues. So here we go. Top 10 list. Number 1, embrace simplicity. Simplifying challenges can help you focus on what truly matters. Alex's approach to free solo climbing using minimal gear highlights the importance of reducing life to its basics. That's the essence of the sport that he's in. Number 2, prepare meticulously. Thorough preparation is key to success, particularly when the stakes are high. Extensive preparation for his climb on Moonlight Buttress, where every move was planned and practiced, set Alex up for success. He said, "I'd never prepared for a free solo as diligently as I did for Moonlight." Number 3, confront your fears. It's not about the absence of fear, but how you manage it. Despite the inherent dangers, Alex continues to climb, demonstrating his methods of dealing with fear that he's practiced time and time again. He says, "Fear, to me, is something to be embraced." Number 4, stay grounded. Recognition should not alter one's perception of oneself. After monumental climbs, Alex remains modest about his achievements. Number 5, live authentically. Being true to oneself is crucial regardless of external expectations or obligations. Alex says, "The truth is that when I started climbing outdoors, I was too shy to go up to strangers at a crag and asked if they'd like to rope up with me." This is an example of Alex being authentic to himself. Number 6, overcome adversity. Overcoming physical and mental barriers through strength and resilience is key to peak performance. Continuing to climb even after the traumatic experiences, such as the divorce of his parents and the death of his father, show Alex's true resilience and ability to battle through tough situations. Number 7, seek solitude. Solitude can be a powerful tool for self-reflection and decision-making. Solo climbs where he's completely alone with his thoughts allowed Alex to reflect and direct his future behaviors. He says, "For the next few hours, I would be alone in a unique way, locked in a high-stakes game of solitude." Number 8, trust in your abilities. Confidence in one's own skill set is essential for taking on any challenge. Alex's solo ascents, where a high degree of self-trust was necessary, allowed him to embrace and accept the challenge. He says, "I discovered if I had any particular gift, it was a mental one, and that's what he used to trust in his own abilities." Number 9, keep challenging yourself. The importance of continually setting and overcoming new challenges cannot be overstated. Alex's progressions from smaller solos to tackling large walls like El Capitan shows his desire to continue to improve and push forward. Number 10, reflect on your experiences. Learning from each experience is vital for personal and professional growth. Alex often reflects on his climbs to glean lessons and improve going forward. He says, "Every climb reflects a lesson, and it's up to me to understand what it's teaching me."
Right? Addition by subtraction can be equally powerful on the path to high performance. So what are the top 10 lessons or things that we can avoid from Alex's story?
Great question. Here we go. Number 1, avoid complacency. Being overly comfortable can lead to dangerous oversights. So Alex's casual approach to climbing sometimes led him to underestimate the risks. Number 2, do not ignore preparation. Inadequate preparation can jeopardize safety and success, particularly in high-stakes situations. Alex's decision to climb Half Dome with less preparation to keep it, and I quote, "sporting," reflects a risky mindset. He says, "I decided to head up the wall with a little less preparation. That's what I meant by keeping it sporting." Number 3, resist underestimating challenges. Misjudging the complexity of a challenge can lead to perilous situations. Alex occasionally downplayed the difficulty of routes, which could have led to fatal errors. Number 4, avoid overconfidence. Excessive confidence might obscure the real risks involved in any task. Alex's frequent solo climbs might reflect an underestimation of the inherent dangers involved. Number 5, do not neglect emotional well-being. Overlooking emotional signals can impact your mental health and decision-making. Alex's reluctance to address his feelings about his parents' divorce and other personal issues, including the death of his father, may have had repercussions in his mental well-being. Number 6, avoid isolation. Overlooking or undervaluing personal relationships can lead to isolation and lack of support in times of need. Alex's intense focus on climbing often came at the expense of maintaining close personal ties, which are crucial for emotional support and well-being. He even says, "I'm not performing for the audience, I climb for myself." Number 7, beware of ignoring advice. Neglecting advice from peers and experts can lead to unnecessary risks. Alex often ignored suggestions to rehearse or prepare more thoroughly, putting him in jeopardy on some claims. Number 8, avoid impulsivity. Acting on impulse without thorough consideration can have dire consequences. Alex's decisions to embark on challenging claims without full preparation reflects impulsivity. Number 9, do not dismiss fear. Ignoring or suppressing fear rather than acknowledging and managing it can be hazardous. Alex's approach to handling fear may sometimes be seen like he's dismissing it outright, but remember, this is something he has experienced and practiced in order to be able to deal with it. He says, fear is not something to be avoided, it's something to be negotiated with. And finally, number 10, avoid a lack of reflection. Failing to reflect on past actions and their outcomes can prevent learning and growth. Alex's sometimes limited reflection on the implications of his claims means that he didn't always learn the lesson going into his next claims. Thank you so much for joining myself and Duncan on this episode. If you enjoyed what you heard, please take a moment to click like and to subscribe. And all we ask is that you take a moment out of your day to spread the word by sharing this episode with 2 people in your network. And for that, we'll be eternally grateful. We look forward to seeing you next time on Performers.